The baby. When daylight arrived, it was necessary for me to stay off the main streets of Jacksonville, Florida, mainly because the police were probably looking for me. On this morning, it was raining very hard, making it very difficult for me to move from one location to another. My nights were generally spent in the parks, and during the daytime, I would move to one of several abandoned red brick buildings located on Riverside Avenue along the banks of the St. Johns River. I walked through the knee-high weeds and entered the old building from the east side. Stepping over large wooden planks and empty boxes, I began to shake my hands, trying to sling some of the water off myself. I was soaked to the bone. I started to unbutton my shirt when I heard someone talking at the other end of the abandoned building. I quickly ducked down behind one of the many wooden posts which held the old structure upright. "This is my hideout. What are they doing in here?" I thought to myself, as I once again began to listen. "Well, I don't know what we're going to do," screamed a man's voice. All at once, a baby began to cry. With eyes wide open, I stretched my neck around the side of the large post to see if I could tell what was happening at the other end of the building. The only light coming into the building was from the outside. There were many windows, but they were way up high. A few were broken. Most were real dirty, blocking whatever light might come in. It was very hard for me to see anything. "Shut the damn ugly thing up, or I'll wring its neck," said the man. "Please don't hurt my baby," said a woman's voice. Slowly, on my hands and knees, I moved along the dirty floor, making my way toward the sounds. The baby cried and it cried and it cried. It just wouldn't stop. I stopped and hid behind a stack of old tires when I thought I was about 30 feet away from where they might be. All at once, a flock of pigeons flew across from one rafter to another, causing me to jump. "Who's there?" yelled out a man as he stood up. Carefully, I stood up and faced in his direction. "What are you doing in here?" he asked me. "I'm in here a lot when I need a place to stay." "Shut that damn ugly thing up!" screamed the man to the girl sitting at his feet. "Why are you in here with a little baby? Ain't you got no place to live?" I questioned. "My baby was born here last night," said the young girl. "You had a baby in here?" She nodded her head, telling me yes. "Ain't people supposed to go to the hospital to have a baby?" The man sat back down on the floor, and he said not a word. I walked over and just stood there looking at the woman who was holding the baby in her arms. All at once, she pulled up her t-shirt, exposing her large breasts. God, I ain't never seen girls' bosoms that big before. They look like they might bust or something, they're so big, I thought to myself. The woman took the baby and began to nurse it. Even when feeding, the baby kept making funny sounds, sort of like a puppy makes when it's scratching and can't get a flea to stop biting. "Well, we have to get out of here. Feed the damn thing and let's throw it in the river," said the man. The girl reached down and kissed the baby on top of its head. "He really can't mean that. Nobody would throw a little baby in the river, would they?" I thought. I stood there for more than 5 minutes. Neither one of them said a word to me. Finally, I turned around and walked back to my end of the building, and I sat down in the corner. Now and then I would hear the man yell at the girl, and then all would be quiet again. It must have been about a half an hour before the baby began to cry again. Once again, the man began to scream, trying to shut the baby up. The next thing I knew, the man was walking toward me, holding the baby in his arms. It was screaming at the top of its lungs. He kept walking closer and closer to where I was sitting. Then he stopped directly in front of me, and he just stood there staring into my eyes. He had this real mean look on his face. Quickly, he turned and walked out the side door of the building. I stood up and walked to see what he was doing. All at once, someone grabbed me on the shoulder. When I spun around, I saw the girl was gasping for air and unable to breathe. I began slapping her on the back until she caught her breath. "He's going to kill my baby! He's going to kill my baby!" I looked out the large opening and saw the man standing at the edge of the river. But I didn't see the baby in his arms. I ran toward him as fast as I could. When I reached him, I saw the baby lying on the ground beside him. Out of breath, I sat down on the ground and I opened the dirty towel wrapped around the baby. I took off my t-shirt and I used spit trying to clean the dried blood off the baby's face and arms. It looked so helpless. Though only 11 years old, I had run away from the orphanage many times in the last 5 years, always traveling the streets and back alleys of Jacksonville, Florida. I had learned much about survival. I knew that one had to be very careful and that they had best not get anyone mad at them. I sat there wondering, should I tell the man that I'd call the police if he tries to throw the baby in the river? Surely he would beat me or try to choke me to death like that one queer guy did several weeks ago. If you don't want it, can I have it? I asked the man. Have what? This little baby. What would you do with a damn ugly baby? He asked me. I'll take it back to the orphanage with me. It's better to be in the orphanage than to be dead. Right? I blurted out. I could hardly believe those words came out of my mouth. As bad as the orphanage was, I realized when looking into that baby's face that being dead was far worse than being molested, mistreated, or going hungry. The man stood there looking out over the river. I looked up and saw the girl walking towards him. She walked up behind him, placed her arms around his waist, and the two of them just stood there looking out over the river. I stood up, picked up the baby, and then I waited for the man to reply. Very slowly I began to walk backwards into the tall weeds. Don't you say anything about where that baby came from, you hear me? Said the man. Yes, sir. I watched the two of them as I continued to walk backwards. When I reached the sidewalk more than 200 yards away, neither one of them had even turned around to look at me. I carried the baby over to the city park at 5 Points, and I sat down on the bench for an hour rocking it back and forth. Soon it began to cry, and I couldn't get it to stop. I took the baby into a local store, and I asked one of the women if she had something that I could feed it. As the word spread that I had found the baby lying in the park, a large crowd began to gather. Within 10 or 15 minutes, there were people everywhere. While everyone was looking at the baby, I filled my pockets with candy bars and penny candy. Then I slipped out the door and back into the world I traveled. I remember feeling a little sad that another orphan, just like me, had just come into the world.